Hello and welcome to another episode of Exchanges with me, Evan Lucas. I went a bit personal this week because I really did want to get him on, and that is none other than Chris Kohler, the finance editor at Nine Entertainment, because he and I have been talking and doing exchanges for almost 10 years now. An absolute personal friend. I've always enjoyed having Chris around in my life, and I really wanted to bring him to you guys as well. We go through absolutely everything today with regards to his career, the stories that he gets to tell, the most fascinating finance products that he gets out there, and not only that, just how he uses those amazing eyebrows of him as well. So without any further ado, here is Chris Kohler. Before we do, don't forget, we are now sponsored here at Exchanges, and it's thanks to More, a lifestyle by design app designed to help everyday Australians manage their wealth, grow their property and overall portfolios with just one app that creates everything in one spot. That's More of moorr.com.au. Please check it out. And without any further ado, here's this week's episode of Exchanges. Chris Kohler, welcome to Exchanges. This is hilarious because normally you and I sit on the other side of the table. I cannot wait to finally pick your brain about what you see in this world. So I am going to give you a bit of free rein first. Let me ask you this. You've been running around the Australian financial media space for a long time now. You've gone through socials, and we'll get to your social media presence and all that stuff as well. But in your travels over your period of time, going from property to equities to now your finance reporting, what are you finding has been the biggest change and the biggest takeouts to date? Because clearly the future is also going to be something else we're going to talk about. Take me through your career so far and how you found it.
Well, it's very nice of you to have me on. I've been looking forward to this because, as you say, I've been interviewing you since I was in the finance journalism equivalent of short pants, and you were helping me and you were being very patient in those early days. I remember calling you,
You
like
make me feel
busy.
old. We are. I know you're a bit younger than me, but we're fairly
Well,
similar
no, I
age.
mean, I'm not saying you were older than me and I was calling you. We were both pretty young, and I remember just calling you and bugging you and being like, "Hey, Evan, what's going on with the market? Why is Blackmore's up so much?" And you were very patient. You never kicked me off the phone. But no, it's nice to have a chat with you. Look, as far as kind of my way through, early days, I was covering financial markets, trying to get things up as quickly as possible online, and then moved sort of into the property space. Started to do a little bit more of kind of the opinion stuff. The avocado debate was a big one for me in my career. That is to say, the housing affordability stuff. And then, yeah, look, I think the big thing that's kind of happened already in the rearview mirror now is just how important social media has become to how we communicate stories and provide, hopefully, some useful analysis on things.
I want to go back then to the avocado story because that was sort of, I remember that blowing up for you as well, and like sort of really becoming a real focal point when Bernard Salt did do that article about smashed avocado and how it felt into affordability, and it became like this sort of almost hashtag scenario with the finance world around affordability. Watching that sort of scenario, what about that story took off in your view, and why does it still resonate today that basically lifestyle and buying a house in particular are seen as not being able to be compatible? You have to basically give one up or the other.
Yeah, it was. It was a really big moment, I reckon, because I reckon that the world, and certainly the economic world, is run on feelings, and you have these feelings before they get a label put to them, and so everyone was kind of growing in their frustration and their irritation that the bloody housing market was getting away from us, and then all of a sudden Bernard Salt comes along and does this one article that sort of creates this sort of name for it, the sort of the avocado issue, as it was sort of put forward, that our spending habits were the thing that was getting in our way, and it just took off immediately as this "how dare you" type of moment, and it got worse before it got better because there was some dog whistling involved with the older people who were like, "Yeah," but then there was, when we were talking to younger people, millennials, it was like, well, it's a very difficult environment. And so there was kind of this back and forth going on. At the time, Bernard wrote it for The Australian, and I was in The Australian at the time, covering markets and business. And so I was, cross and doing social media videos about it and stuff. And then they chucked me the the keys and said, "Do you want to write a return piece to Bernard?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." I hadn't done that before. And then they were like, "All right, here's a 25-year-old who's got something to say." And it was kind of my first chance at actually having a bit of a say about something like that. And it was nice of them to do that. They didn't have to, and it could have gone horribly wrong. Possibly did. I don't know.
No, it's certainly gone well for you because I mean we will get to where that's come from because I want to go back to something you said, which I absolutely fundamentally agree with, which is the feelings part of the economy. Because it's a feel, it's not necessarily a structural or a physical or an actual piece of data thing that you can point to. People feel the pressure and then are moving to it because it hasn't changed if we're honest about where we are right now. So the other thing that has come across particularly in the last 6 months, I know you've been touching this, is we've been through the cost of living crisis. The government's trying to tell us right now we're past the worst of it. We are seeing inflation fall, etc. But the buzz term online is that the cost of living crisis isn't a cost of living crisis, it's a spending crisis. And that our living, wants and needs versus our living standards versus our actuals isn't meeting. How have you found that discussion? Because I know you've seen that on socials. I know you've been involved with actually having to break it down, trying to show both sides. Do you still feel that point of view, moving on from the avocado debate to now basically the spending debate, is a fair and reasonable one, or is it more than that?
Look, I think it's now out of date, and I think one of the things that's happened pretty recently, or possibly for a long time, I don't really know, is that things develop quite fast, and any notions that you have from 3 years ago can be completely out of whack now. So we came out of COVID, and everyone was pretty, going pretty well in the back pocket department, and people started spending, and maybe we did overdo the spending. But that feels like an eternity ago now. I mean, people are carving anything discretionary out of their budget, and we can kind of see that. And so I think, it was fair to say that we had a bit of a want thing going on with us all on the way out of COVID, but I just don't see it anymore. I mean, there's research that comes out pretty regularly that just says, the idea of a holiday has gone out the window. People are getting rid of any, little treats and going to the movies and coffees and all this sort of stuff. I think that's probably gone. And I think this whole idea that things move on a lot faster than maybe we give them credit for, I have really been finding that lately in a lot of different types of stories, whether it's insurance, people are underinsured because the cost to rebuild a home in their mind is stuck 5, 6, 7 years ago. But of course, things have changed dramatically. All these sorts of things that are kind of just, grocery prices. We're still stuck in this idea that a weekly grocery shop should cost whatever it is for your family, 130. And now that it's 180, we kind of just, it's taking a while to just get up to speed with it because it's changed really fast, I reckon.
So is that in your, outings and talking to everybody, is that the learnings from COVID? Is that what it now is? Because, between 2012 and 2019, the speed of change was anemic. I mean, let's be honest. Inflation was not a word that pretty much the majority knew about. Interest rates was also something that the world didn't really care. I know they knew about it, but they didn't really care about it because it was sitting roughly about 1 to 1.5%. Has COVID just all of a sudden brought all of the things that we never had to worry about to mind? Then the other part of that question is how much of that change that you just spoke about is because that we now live our lives on our phones and therefore on social media?
Yeah, well, that part is definitely a thing. Like, you look at the analytics and people are spending 5, 7, 8 hours a day on their phones. I mean, it's kind of historically impossible to wrap your mind around. But yeah, I mean, like you would have felt like this too, I reckon, Evan. Like back in those days, pre-COVID days, telling somebody that you were covering finance or working in finance or dealing with economics, people glaze over
Glaze
immediately,
over.
right? Like, did you have that? And
Oh,
then
yeah. Like, "What do you do?" "Oh, I work in economics and markets." "Oh, cool."
no follow up.
Yeah, full
That's
stop.
right.
I still sort of get that, but now they're like, "Oh, can you tell me how to do this?" And I'm like, "No, no,
No,
sorry, I
no, no,
can't.
I can't. I'm so
I
sorry.
can't."
But yeah, it's like I felt that too. Like, I used to cover RBA decisions, right? Like when I was at Sky News, it was you were there from basically sun up to sundown. You were crossing in live every half an hour. And it was so boring because this is back when things were unchanged for like 2 years or very little was going on. And then all
On
of a
that, I
sudden,
remember posting on social media a picture of the cat with the marble that pushes it around its bowl, and every month would just push that out before it even was launched
yeah,
because you knew that the RBA wasn't gonna do it,
that's
and
right.
I did it. I remember counting it 36 times because that's all it was, and that's back when you and I were having fun on social media with the whole Finfluence idea before it became a thing.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it was boring, right? It was dead set
It was boring, but
boring.
you and me were able to kind of have some jokes
Oh, we
about it.
loved
Like
it.
I don't think either of our wives would have been watching any of the stuff we were doing at the time, or anyone else in our family. But yeah, I mean, like then all of a sudden everybody got a massive mortgage, and it became the thing that people were focusing on, and now it leads our news every time there's an RBA decision, and so it should. I mean, average mortgage is what, 666 grand now in New South Wales. It's like 850 grand.
Uh-huh.
Geez, there's a lot in that if we're talking about one rate cut. So yeah, it makes sense. But like the rate of change has been enormous, and you're right. Like that level of engagement with the news flow is huge, never before seen, I reckon.
So with the engagement, is it just your 90 seconds on Instagram and your 30 seconds on TikTok, or is there actual more engagement than before? Because, I mean, let's look at the fact that you have really become quite a go-to in the finance internet social space with your following. Like, how have you seen that change? Because I know you went from doing a certain video type to doing a different video type, and the engagement that with that change has seen you become one of the biggest personalities in this space. How are you getting 90 seconds worth of quality content to deliver what is a very important message with regards to the RBA?
If it's on the social media side of things, there's the proper reporting, and I'm going to tell you as much information as I can in a short period of time as possible, and the journalistic sort of ways of doing that still apply. The upside down pyramid, where all the stuff that they teach you, that still applies. But there's also room for this other kind of content, which is, there are basically very few rules. I mean, you can build a piece of content around something that you think is going to be engaging, something that you think is, perhaps a bit of fun, or highlighting something that's sort of been playing on your mind. And as long as it's still factually accurate, and as long as there's nothing that's, you know, incorrect, and there's nothing that's defamatory, you basically just end up, you kind of just build it backwards a little bit. Like it's kind of, there's a flow to it, and you just decide where the points are that I want to land something that is true or real, whether it's an amount of money, or if it's an interest rate decision, or I think there's kind of this, it's interesting. And I've basically just been having a trial and error with it. And if you go back far enough into my socials, you see stuff that just bombed because I was just trying stuff that just doesn't work. And now all of a sudden you kind of find stuff out, like on YouTube. Like, so you asked sort of about the 30-second, 90-second thing, and turns out YouTube, there are people overseas who are quite interested in what's going on in Australian economics. I never ever would have thought that, but they'll give you 3 minutes. I don't know why. I'd love to know why, but yeah, it's just this. As you were saying before, this amount of time people are spending on their phones, there kind of can't be enough content. It's
Mhm.
just, you just need more. It's the hungriest beast in the history of human existence, is this content situation we found ourselves in. So I'm just kind of trying to feed the beast, I guess.
That's the term, right? Feed the beast. Because I also want to go back to something you hit on there very, very clearly, which I think is fascinating, is the quality and that it's factually correct. Because the other part of the world that you and I work in and what we are now dealing with is inverted commas factually correct information domestically, but also what's coming from overseas in the other direction and is being consumed by domestic users here in Australia. How are you getting through that? And not only that, what would you like to see to try and make sure that what is being presented in this world is factually correct? Can be done with a fun take, can be done with all of the props and all of the jargon material that is now produced. But what do you think needs to be done to actually make sure that it is, as you said, factually correct and therefore somewhat sticks to the journalistic principles that you've alluded to before?
Yeah, look, it's disappointing what's been going on lately with regard to the big social media platforms and their positions on fact checking. I mean, that's just disappointing that they're doing less of it and they're less concerned about it. Because I think that, to answer your question, that is what should be happening. If you have a platform that is big, you should be able to weed things out. But they've decided that that's not the way they want to go with it,
Feeding
and
the
that
beast, right?
yeah, I mean, it just problem is that ends up leaving us with basically an audience decides situation, and that's okay. It's better than I mean, the reason that's okay, I think, is because for the most part, people want accuracy and authenticity, and they do a pretty good job, I think, of deciding what's real. Like if I put up a video about even if it's just pure satire about a historical business story, people watch it and then immediately switch tabs and fact check it. And then they come back to the comment section and then they'll say,
Bang on.
if there's a slight deviation from the story, they'll point it out. And so people like doing that. People like sort of self-governing, I think, in those comment sections. So yeah, I mean, I think it is extremely important to be well researched and present actual information. So I hope that continues, but it's not the world we're living in at the moment.
Because the other thing I want to then go back to in your career, you've been on the equity side, you've been on the property side, and you've been in that social media world. One of the things that I've now been doing quite a lot is I do a lot of property material, and it's fascinating to see the difference in terms of how the material is done, but also what can be done in property versus what can be done in pretty much other investment class that's out there. The information, because the government is obviously so desperate to help as many first time owners and everybody and their dog get a home, that the information now is quite blurred. Is that the other thing that you've noticed in your time? Is that property is this almost independent beast itself to every other part of the sort of finance world? How do we start having that discussion? Because there is clearly a huge amount of cowboys that are playing in the gray area and playing very, very hard.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. The mentality thing in Australia, I mean, I've often asked you what you reckon. I mean, why is it that a young person will still wade into the property space with that old mentality of you got to be in bricks and mortar, the property ladder is going to help you out, rather than doing something like going to some equities or an index fund where you're talking about a non-leveraged investment that, potentially could be the better choice for them. There's a mentality thing going on in Australia when it comes to property, Ev. I mean,
I would also, just to interrupt you, there's two parts to it. Gearing, so the fact that you get bigger upside with a property, and it's the only asset class that you can tangibly touch. So it's the only thing that you can bricks and mortar change physically yourself. We are a nation of DIY, which is something against us, and whereas nations overseas are more, do it for me. So there's that. I think that's the other part of it in terms of that mentality you're alluding to, is that gearing gives you that ability to get massive upside quite quickly, whereas there's a lot, inverted commas, bigger risk in equities in people's view. And but also the fact they can touch it, they can actually physically change it themselves.
Uh, yeah, look, I think the big thing for me that I've been thinking about a lot lately is the growing difference between a detached house and everything else. Like, so we did this report the other day that came out from CoreLogic that was the pain and gain report. They do it every quarter, and it's the
Yeah,
proportion of loss making sales and successful profit making sales. And out my window here is Melbourne CBD, and we're talking half losing money for the owners. And these aren't people flipping these apartments. This is 8, 9 year holding periods. Places like Parramatta, Ryde, a third of them are losing money on these
mhm.
long held, you know, put everything into it type of investments. And your heart breaks for them. And you just sort of think, I don't know, you're not seeing that with detached houses. And what the government wants to build is more medium and high density. So you're going to end up with this massive split here between, houses and everything else. And the idea that you get your foot onto the property ladder and then leap yourself off into the family home, I mean, that is evaporating in front of us.
Yeah, and I'd agree. And this, as you said, like the fundamental thing in property they talk about is, it's not the house, it's the soil underneath it. I mean, the earth is what you're valuing there, and therefore the land value around it. That inverted commas 1950s Australian dream, as you sort of highlighted, is still seen as the absolute nth degree. Admittedly, Gen Zers are starting to suggest that because they can never get into it, that they are going down the other avenue. Again, what I do want to sort of keep going back down to with the property question, though, is, as you said, the developers and the buyers and then also the in between buyers agents, etc. That link in the chain is being quite fascinating because they are interlinked in some respects, and there is a little bit of ethical questions around it. Have you seen that during your days at Domain? Have you seen that also in you're going out, as you said, looking at what goes on in Melbourne CBD or looking at what's going on out in Western Sydney, parts of northern parts of Brisbane as well, having that same problem? Is it because we're dropping the ball collectively? Is it because of the government? Or is it because, again, there's just this idea that property will never lose, that people are getting caught up with that?
As in the sort of the dodgy tactics and the sort of the questionable stuff going on.
Yeah. Yep. All of the above.
Yeah. Look, I think you see it here and there. Obviously, there's cowboys in the sector.
Every industry.
I mean, I don't know. Look, I've been looking at it a little bit differently over the last few weeks. Basically, since Cyclone Alfred, because I'm looking at this now through the lens of insurance. Like I know I've been talking to property developers who are now saying, if I want to do greenfield property development and build 100 houses, I might now have to build a flood trench at a few $1 million personal expense to me and the business, and that's just now part of the red tape here. I don't know. I think developers are a bit up against it at the moment. The federal government wants 1.2 million well located homes. I don't know. They're not going to get there like in
Where?
5 years. What are they going to do on that front? Like we
Yeah.
need this supply. The properties are going to keep on probably going up in value, detached housing. I mean, there's cowboys that are going to kind of fill their pockets, and there's some dodgy stuff that has happened over the last decade or so in the real estate industry to kind of make sure that the percentage commissions are kept on massively increasing asset prices, and that now we're going from 6-week campaigns to 4-week campaigns, and marketing costs are separated out as a separate expense for vendors. I don't know. Look, you see all this sort of stuff, but you kind of turn around and go, yeah, property, there's some issues there. Retail, plenty of cowboys there too. Plenty of cowboys in super banking. I mean, it's a problem right now to be a consumer of pretty much anything. You've got to have your wits so firmly about you. It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah. And I think that's the answer in terms of what I was hoping to push you towards, which is this is happening everywhere in terms of that space. And the consumer is always right question is part of that answer again, is that we've actually started to work out the consumer doesn't have to be right or wrong. As long as you can sort of get away with what you're doing, the industry will attract of all shapes and sizes the right and the wrong person. And that's, I think, where again the social media part of it has been fascinating because again, the way the algorithms work, the fact that it puts that right person in front of the wrong person is the catch. So my next and final part of this discussion, I can't go away from it. Your socials are incredible. Your satire is fantastic, and I think it's absolutely brilliant what you're doing in finance.
Thank you, mate. It's
Here's
really
my
kind.
question: which one's been your favorite?
Favorite video to do?
Yeah,
Um, I I really like doing the ones that sort of, in my opinion, draw attention to something that's been bugging me about a topic. I really like doing those, but I really like doing the ones that show how human some of the fuck ups, frankly, have been at big businesses and just how bumbling it can be sometimes. So
yeah,
I think my favorite to do and to watch people engage with was probably the one where I talked about the origin story of Puma and Adidas being these two brothers who hated each other, and because it kind of their feud with each other, in my opinion, in many ways, drove the sports marketing boom of the 20th century. They were outbidding each other to try to get contracted people wearing their type of shoes. And it was all just a big middle finger to their brother over this kind of really vague Nazi feud that was going on. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I just think like the business world is kind of so rich with these incredible stories of ego and folly and just like human error that's just captain's calls. And it's funny because you see it around, like everybody who is watching this or listening to this, I'm sure will have that sort of experience in their sector where it's like you feel like in 2025 you should have data that tells you what you should be doing, and yet for so many people you feel like your boss might just be making a decision a bit like a detective before DNA was sort of invented. You know what I mean? Like, I got a
Yes,
hunch
I
about
do.
this. I reckon this is the way we're gonna do this.
It's back to your words before, right? It's the feeling, it's
Yeah.
the
Oh
vibe,
yeah.
it's Marbo, it's, it's the castle, right? It is literally that sort of concept that you don't realize until you walk into a corporate organization or walk into a corporate room that actually these people in charge, they probably know as much as you do, if not less. They've either survived to get in, as you said. The Adidas one was fascinating because I've seen that story before around
Yeah.
Adidas and the whole thing with his brother and around how it worked and sponsoring the West German football team and all that kind of stuff. The business was a byproduct, and you look also again at sort of right now some of the bigger players. I mean, let's look at Meta. Meta's a great example that it's a what happened with Facebook became a byproduct of trying to just be a uni geek and a little bit sort of a bit of a turd, let's be
Yeah.
honest, about what the original idea of Facebook was. And most businesses are like that. Because the other thing that I always get, as you said, data, right? Where is the data that I can do? And the response I always said, if everybody knew what the data was, everyone would do it. It's the same in investing. It's the same in everything. They're like, I want you to do this, because this got this amount of response from this return and from this investment. I'm like, that doesn't mean it's going to work this time around. And that's what is so fascinating about the whole thing. And again, your videos are brilliant like that because, as you said, you went back and look at your videos before you sort of changed it up. You won't get anywhere.
No, no, and and it's entirely possible that all this falls in a heap, and I'll try something new again. Like, it's just that's the nature of video. I think when I started doing it at the Australian, it was that we started off by saying, okay, here are the 3 business stories you need to know today, and I'd sit there and I'd tell you about them, and then that didn't really go anywhere, and then you try the next thing, and then the next thing. I don't know. I think the thing that I have found about social media is that it's such a personal thing because it's your phone and I'm only talking to you. Like, if you're on the radio or on the TV, you're just putting it out there, but I'm talking just to you. And you kind of trying to have some sort of way of connecting with those feelings that we were talking about before, that maybe even the person hasn't kind of really put a label on themselves. Like, I go into the supermarket all the time and you just walk out feeling like a little beaten up by the process, and you kind of can't really put your finger on it, but you feel like maybe these sales are kind of not really that good. So if somebody comes along with an ACCC report in their hand and they go, well, let's make a joke about these sales, then you're probably going to have a little bit of a connection with it, I hope.
I'd agree. And I think the beaten up term is a perfect way of sort of talking about again that cost of living scenario is that at the moment you've beaten up feeling is because you just don't feel your money goes the distance that it used to. And the speed, as you said, in the post COVID world of the change in your dollar is there. Chris, I always finish these interviews with the same question for everyone. So I'll put it to you as well. If you're in charge for just one day, what would you do?
Such a good question. If I were in charge for one day, I would make it so that all advertising had to be completely honest just for the day, and instead of having a terms and conditions apply, see in store for details really quickly at the bottom, you'd have to have the real information at the top, and then any of this sales gimmicky stuff said really fast at the end of the ad. So you just flip the whole thing. Like, past performance is not a reliable indicator, all that sort of stuff. Do
Yep.
that at the top of the ad and then say the little thing at the bottom. I get so fed up with the some of the marketing stuff, and I think
I was
everybody
about to
else
say all
does.
marketers out there have probably just turned off you, right? But yeah,
I mean, I get it though. Like, you have to. Nobody is expecting people to be completely honest and say all of the issues there are. But wouldn't it be nice if just for one day every ad was upfront about how many fees you're gonna get charged, and the ways in which we're actually going to be squeezing your data out of you and selling it to other places. And hey, maybe that call center that calls you in 3 weeks' time, that's because of us actually. Like, I think it's not. Look, it's not deceptive. It's not all that disappointing, and it is understandable. But geez, wouldn't it be nice if we could just have a day where I wasn't getting sold anything actively everywhere I turn?
or
It's a
when you were being sold, you actually knew what you were being sold and therefore what you were buying into
yeah.
when you said yes.
So,
Chris Kohler, it
nothing
has
can
been an
happen.
absolute pleasure to have you on the other side of the camera and sitting on the other side of the desk. Thank you so much for joining Exchanges.
Thank you, mate. It's been fantastic. See you later.
Loved it. Big thank you to Chris. It was an absolute pleasure to have him on. I loved sitting there to actually finally have a proper banter session, going through all of the things that he's seen over his entire career. I really have and still enjoy having him in my life, and I hope that you really enjoyed what he brought as well. To you out there, thank you as always for listening or for watching wherever you're getting this through. But please don't forget, please subscribe or like or give us some form of return, because the more of that we get, the better we move up on the overall profile and the algorithms. And I do love doing these, and I know that those of you out there that are listening are really enjoying it. So thanks again for listening. Thanks to Chris for being in there. And once again, thanks for joining what is becoming a growing Exchanges community. We'll see you next week.